If you love reading or just prefer to listen, welcome to John Smeaton's Regular Reads.
Hello there, back again for another couple of chapters of Cirque de Freak. So we're on to chapter 6 and 7. Okay. It was Friday evening, the end of the school week, the start of the weekend, and everybody was laughing and running home as quick as they could, delighted to be free, except a certain miserable foursome who hung around the schoolyard looking like the end of the world had arrived. The names, Steve, Leonard, Tommy Jones, Alan Morrison, me, Darren Shan. It's not fair, Alan moaned. Whoever heard of a circus only letting you buy 2 tickets? It's stupid. We all agreed with him, but there was nothing we could do about it except from stand around, stubbing the ground with our feet looking sour. Finally, Alan asked the question which was on everybody's mind. So who gets the tickets? We looked at each other and shook our heads uncertainly. Well, Steve has to get one, I said. He put in more money than the rest of us, and he went to buy them, so he has to get one. Agreed? Agreed, Tommy said. Agreed, Alan said. I think he would have argued about it, except he knew he wouldn't win. Steve smiled and took out one of the tickets. Who goes with me? He asked. I brought in the flyer, Alan said quickly. Nuts to that, I told him. Steve should get to choose. Not on your life, Tommy laughed. You're his best friend. If we let him pick, he'll pick you. I say we fight for it. I have boxing gloves at home. No way, Alan squeaked. He's small and never gets into fights. I don't want to fight either, I said. I'm no coward, but I knew I wouldn't stand a chance against Tommy. His dad teaches him how to box properly, and they have their own punching bag. He would have floored me in the first round. Let's pick straws for it, I said, but Tommy didn't want to. He has terrible luck and never wins anything like that. We argued about it a bit more until Steve came up with an idea. I know what to do, he said, opening his school bag. He tore the 2 middle sheets of paper out of an exercise book and using his ruler carefully cut them into small pieces, each one roughly the same size as the ticket. Then he got his empty lunchbox and dumped the paper inside. Here's how it works, he said, holding up the second ticket. I put this in, put the top on and shake it about, okay? We nodded. You stand side by side and I'll throw the bits of paper over your heads. Whoever gets the ticket wins. Me and the winner will give the other 2 their money back when we can afford it. Is that fair enough, or does somebody have a better idea? Sounds good to me, I said. I don't know, Alan grumbled. I'm the youngest. I'm not able to jump as high as... Quit yapping, Tommy said. I'm the smallest, and I don't mind. Besides, the ticket might come out on the bottom of the pile. Float down low and be in just the right place for the shortest person. All right, Alan said, but no shoving. Agreed, I said. No rough stuff. Agreed, Tommy nodded. Steve put the top on the box and gave it a good long shake. Get ready, he told us. We stood back from Steve and lined up in a row. Tommy and Alan were side by side, but I kept out of the way so I'd have room to swing both arms. Okay, Steve said. I'll throw everything in the air on the count of 3. All set? We nodded. 1, Steve said, and I saw Alan wiping sweat from around his eyes. 2, Steve said, and Tommy's fingers twitched. 3, Steve yelled, jerked off the lid and tossed the paper high up into the air. A breeze came along and blew the bits of paper straight at us. Tommy and Alan started yelling and grabbing wildly. It was impossible to see the ticket in among the scraps of paper. I was about to start grabbing when all of a sudden I got an urge to do something strange. It sounded crazy, but I've always believed in following an urge, or a hunch. So what I did was, I shut my eyes, stuck out my hands like a blind man, and waited for something magical to happen. As I'm sure you know, usually when you try something you've seen in a movie, it doesn't work, like if you try doing a wheelie with your bike, or making your skateboard jump in the air. But every once in a while, when you least expect it, something clicks. For a second I felt paper blowing by my hands. I was going to grab them, but something told me it wasn't time. Then, a second later, a voice inside me yelled, "Now!" I shut my hands really fast. The wind died down and the pieces of paper drifted to the ground. I opened my eyes and saw Alan and Tommy down on their knees searching for the ticket. It's not here, Tommy said. I can't find it anywhere, Alan shouted. They stopped searching and looked up at me. I hadn't moved. I was standing still, my hands shut tight. What's in your hands, Darren? Steve asked softly. I stared at him, unable to answer. It was like a dream, where I couldn't move or speak. He doesn't have it, Tommy said. He can't have. He had his eyes shut. Maybe so, Steve said, but there's something in those fists of his. Open them, Alan said, giving me a shove. Let's see what you're hiding. I looked at Alan, then Tommy, then Steve, and then very slowly I opened my right hand fist. There was nothing there. My heart stopped, my heart and stomach dropped. Alan smiled and Tommy started looking down at the ground again, trying to find the missing ticket. What about the other hand? Steve asked. I gazed down at my left-hand fist. I'd almost forgotten about that one. Slowly, even slower than the first time, I opened it. There was a piece of green paper smack dab in the middle of my hand, but it was lying face down, and since there was nothing on its back, I had to turn it over, just to be sure. And there it was, in red and blue letters, the magical name, Cirque du Freak. I had it. The ticket was mine. I was going to the freak show with Steve. Yes! I screamed and punched the air with my fist. I'd won. Chapter 7. The tickets were for the Saturday show, which was just as well, since it gave me a chance to talk to my parents and ask if I could stay over at Steve's Saturday night. I didn't tell them about the freak show because I knew they would say no if they found out about it. I felt bad about not telling the whole truth, but at the same time I hadn't really told a lie. All I'd done was keep my mouth shut. Saturday couldn't go quickly enough for me. I tried keeping busy because that's how you made time pass without noticing, but I kept thinking about the Cirque du Freak and wishing it was time to go. I was quite grumpy, which was odd for me on a Saturday, and Mum was glad to see the back of me when it was time to go to Steve's. Annie knew I was going to the freak show and asked me to bring her back something, a photo if possible, but I told her cameras weren't allowed. It said so on the ticket, and I didn't have enough money for a t-shirt. I told her I'd buy her a badge if they had them, or a poster, but she'd have to keep it hidden and not tell Mum and Dad where she'd got it if they found it. Dad dropped me off at Steve's at 6 o'clock. He asked what time I wanted to be collected in the morning. I told him midday if that's okay. Don't watch horror movies, okay? He said before he left. I don't want you coming home with nightmares. Oh, Dad, I groaned. Everyone in my class watches horror movies. Listen, he said, I don't mind an old Vincent Price film or one of the less scary Dracula movies, but none of these nasty new ones, okay? Okay, I promised. Good man, he said, and drove off. I hurried up to the house and rang the bell 4 times, which was my secret signal to Steve. He must have been standing right inside, because he opened the door straight away and dragged me in. About time, he growled, then pointed to the stairs. See that hill? He asked, speaking like a soldier in a war film. Yes, sir, I said, snapping my heels together. We have to take it by dawn. Are we using rifles or machine guns, sir? I asked. Are you mad? He barked. We'd never be able to carry a machine gun through all that mud. He nodded at the carpet. Rifles it is, sir, I agreed. And if we were taken, he warned me, save the last bullet for yourself. We started up the stairs like a couple of soldiers, firing imaginary guns at imaginary foes. It was childish but great fun. Steve lost a leg on the way, and I had to help him to the top. You may have taken my leg, he shouted from the landing, and you may take my life, but you'll never take my country. It was a stirring speech. At least it stirred Mrs. Leonard, who came through from the downstairs living room to see what the racket was. She smiled when she saw me and asked if I wanted anything to eat or drink. I didn't. Steve said he'd like some caviar and champagne, but it wasn't funny the way he said it, and I didn't laugh. Steve doesn't get on with his mum. He lives alone with her. His dad left when Steve was very young, and they're always arguing and shouting. I don't know why. I never asked him. There were certain things you didn't discuss with your friends if you were boys. Girls can talk about stuff like that. But if you're a boy, you have to talk about computers, football, war, and so on. Parents aren't cool. How will we sneak out tonight? I asked in a whisper as Steve's mum went back into the living room. It's okay, Steve said. She's going out. He often calls her she instead of mum. She'll think we're in bed when she gets back. What if she checks? Steve laughed nastily. Enter my room without being asked? She wouldn't dare. I didn't like Steve when he talked like that, but I said nothing in case he went into one of his moods. I didn't want to do anything that might spoil the show. Steve dragged out some of his horror comics and we read them aloud. Steve has great comics, which are only meant for adults. My mum and dad would hit the roof if they knew about them. Steve also has lots of old magazines and books about monsters and vampires and werewolves and ghosts. Does a steak have to be made out of wood? I asked when I'd finished reading a Dracula comic. No, he said. It can be made of metal or ivory, even plastic, as long as it's hard enough to go right through the heart. And that will kill a vampire? I asked. Every time, he said. I frowned. But you told me you have to cut off their heads and stuff them with garlic and toss them in a river. Some books say you have to, he agreed, but that's to make sure you kill the vampire's spirit as well as its body, so it can't come back as a ghost. Can a vampire come back as a ghost? I asked, eyes wide. Probably not, Steve said. If you had the time and wanted to make sure, cutting off the head and getting rid of it would be worth doing. You don't want to take any chances with vampires, do you? No, I said, shivering. What about werewolves? Do you need silver bullets to kill them? I don't think so, Steve said. I think normal bullets can do the job. You might have to use lots of them, but they should work. Steve knows everything there is to know about horror facts. He's read every sort of horror book there is. He says every story has at least some bit of truth in it, even if most are made up. Do you think the Wolfman at the Cirque du Freak is a werewolf? I asked. Steve shook his head. From what I've read, he said, the wolfmen in freak shows are normally just very hairy guys. Some of them are more like animals than people, and eat live chickens and stuff, and they're not werewolves. A werewolf would be no good in a show, because it can only turn into a wolf when there's a full moon. Every other night it would be a normal guy. Oh, I said, what about Snake Boy? Do you... Hey, he laughed. Save the questions for later. The shows long ago were terrible. The owners used to starve the freaks and keep them locked up in cages and treat them like dirt, but I don't know what this one will be like. There might not even be real freaks. There might only be people in costumes. The freak show was being held at a place near the other side of town. We had to leave not long after 9 o'clock to make sure we got there in time. We could have got a cab, except we'd used most of our pocket money to replace the cash Steve took from his mum. Besides, it was more fun walking. It was spookier. We told ghost stories as we walked. Steve did most of the talking because he knows way more than me. He was on top form. Sometimes he forgets the ends of stories or gets names mixed up, but not tonight. It was better than being with Stephen King. It was a long walk, longer than we thought, and we almost didn't make it in time. We had to run the last half kilometre. We were panting like dogs when we got there. The venue was an old theatre which used to show movies. I'd passed it once or twice in the past. Steve told me once that it was shut down because a boy fell off the balcony and got killed. He said it was haunted. I asked my dad about it and he said it was a load of lies. It's hard sometimes to know whether you should believe the stories your dad tells you or the ones your best friend tells you. There was no name outside the door, and no cars parked nearby, and no queue. We stopped out front and bent over until we got our breath back. Then we stood and looked at the building. It was tall and dark and covered in jagged grey stones. Lots of the windows were broken, and the door looked like a giant open mouth. Are you sure this is the place? I asked, trying not to sound scared. This is what it says on the ticket, Steve said, and checked again, just to be sure. Yep, this is it. Maybe the police found out and the freaks had to move on. I said, maybe there isn't any show tonight. Maybe, Steve said. I looked at him and licked my lips nervously. What do you think we should do? I asked. He stared back at me and hesitated before replying. I think we should go in, he said finally. We've come this far. It'd be silly to turn back now without knowing for sure. I agree, I said, nodding. Then I gazed up at the scary building and gulped. It looked like the sort of place you saw in a horror movie, where lots of people go in but don't come out. Are you scared? I asked Steve. No, he said. I could hear his teeth chattering and knew he was lying. "Are you?" he asked. "Course not," I said. We looked at each other and grinned. We knew we were both terrified, but at least we were together. It's not so bad being scared if you're not alone. "Shall we enter?" Steve asked, trying not to sound cheerful. "Might as well," I said. We took a deep breath, crossed our fingers, then started up the steps. There were 9 stone steps leading up to the door, each one cracked and covered with moss, and went in.
Thanks for tuning in. You've been a part of John Smeaton's Regular Reading.